go. So welcome everyone to this PwC Cyber Talk, which where we are going to talk about the future of security operations. And our guests today are Oliver Smith and Paul Bottomley from PwC UK. So I will hand over to you guys to get things kicked off.
Thanks so much, Anders, and thank you for the intro. I'll just sort of echo your comments. A massive welcome to everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, extremely busy schedules to join us for this session. By way of some really brief introductions, Paul and I are security practitioners at PwC, and we're responsible for leading our threat hunt business in the UK. Just in terms of what to expect for today, we'll run for about 25 to 30 minutes before opening up for discussion, as Anders mentioned. And during this session, which, as Anders has said, is around the kind of future of security operations, or our sort of perspectives around that, and more specifically the role that SOAR plays, we're going to aim to address some of the more common challenges that are faced by security operations teams. We'll give you a bit of an introduction to security orchestration, automation, and response, together with a view of some of the benefits and challenges in its adoption as well as its use. We'll give you our view of the SecOps maturity journey and the considerations that you might want to think about as you progress along this maturity curve. And we'll finish with an example, which I personally think brings some of this to life and makes it a little bit more clear as to the benefits. And that'll be an example where our managed cyber defense service stopped a particularly sophisticated threat actor in their tracks. Just by way of some additional background, it's been quite a while now, but we've worked with automation and orchestration for a number of years. I was talking to Paul about this the other day, but I think earlier sort of conversations around the various technologies probably go back sort of 4.5, maybe even 5 years in some cases. And we've worked with a number of platforms in various guises, and SOAR capability is absolutely a central component to our own managed services business, or managed cyber defense, as we call it. And I think, for me and for our business, that the push for complete visibility, as well as the ability to process and leverage all of the telemetry that's available in near real time is, well, I guess it's a pretty important consideration for us. We believe this is essential in order to protect, detect, respond, you name it, to the ever-changing threats that we face. And we are, I think it's fair to say, pretty well versed in the challenges that we've faced along the way. As I've mentioned, we've been doing it for some years now. We're not for 1 minute suggesting this has been plain sailing, far from it. There's definitely been some challenges we faced along the way. And the intention of today's session is just to try and bring some of that to light. And hopefully, more than anything, Paul and I would really welcome a discussion, and we'd welcome your views, your perspectives. I guess just a couple of other things to mention. So our ethos is pretty simple, really, or I think it's pretty simple. Automate everything that can be automated. Leverage carefully curated playbooks and workflows that allow us to cut through the noise, and ultimately free up humans to focus on what technology can't, and address common challenges like alert fatigue. So you'll hear that as a sort of theme, throughout today: alert fatigue, analyst fatigue, etc. And as part of this ecosystem that I kind of described, the intention is that we look after the heavy lifting and only escalate the things that need to be escalated. And that's again a common theme with the benefits of SOAR and benefits of automation and orchestration. And we believe that this kind of focus gives our customers confidence that when we flag something, it really does need their attention. It's not just more noise. It's not just more things that are being added to the ever-increasing pile of stuff that SecOps teams need to look at, thus empowering SecOps teams. Okay, so if I just get straight into it, let's briefly set the scene. I guess, understatement of the day, security operations teams have some of the toughest roles around, and it's not getting any easier. The threat landscape is continually changing. I don't need to tell you all that. You'll know that for yourselves. We face threats that can cripple an entire organization in hours, if not minutes. And actually, in today's day and age, it's more likely to be in minutes. We're talking like sub 8 minutes is kind of where you need to be. We face threats that can only be stopped if they're detected and contained in real time, not at human speed. We face unprecedented volumes of data from an ever-growing technology and service stack, as well as an increasingly interconnected supply chain. And all of this is, again, I don't need to tell you, all of this is only going to continue on an upwards trend, right? We're just going to see this becoming more and more of a challenge. I'm sure you all hear this a lot, but there's a reason why people say it's complicated and it's hard, because it is. Businesses are spending millions on cyber analytics and operations, but the reality is a huge range of fragmented and unintegrated point tools, manual processes, and complex administrative procedures make it difficult and, quite frankly, in some cases frustrating for analysts to do things like get access to the right data, stitched together in the right way, that provides them with the right kind of context in a single pane of glass, and all of this in order to simply do their jobs. So it's quite a lot to sort of factor into it. And this is not to mention the massive operational overhead of managing all of this disparate infrastructure and tooling. Think about challenges associated with tuning it all, engineering it, updating it, scaling it up and down as necessary, and of course, let's not forget securing it. Right, it'd be a pretty embarrassing state of affairs not to have secure infrastructure if you're providing security services around it. And then, add to that the ever-increasing amount of security data that needs to be collected and processed and analysed on a daily basis. And it's no wonder that we hear so frequently, and I think this is becoming a more and more common theme across the industry. And again, I would love your perspectives on it, but we hear more and more about the realities of analyst fatigue. And we see high attrition levels in security operations, right? And there are obviously a number of other reasons for that, but make no mistake, people want to do their jobs. They want to be equipped with the information and the tools and the data that they need to do that, to make decisions, to use their brains to do things that humans can do, and to enjoy their roles. So we'll get into that a bit more shortly. All right, Paul, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the next slide, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So I think many people, if not everyone on this call, will have heard the term SOAR, which stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. It has actually gone through a name change and definition updates over the years, but essentially it is referring to a capability focused on 3 different areas. So we have security incident response, which is covering like the case management side of it, the IR knowledge base that you can build up. We have orchestration and automation, so the playbooks or workflows that are executed across the infrastructure. And then finally, threat intelligence, which I guess gives that kind of deep context into events. And really, the primary goal of SOAR is to streamline security operations. So this can mean multiple things, but by and large, it is enhancing threat management and response workflows to reduce mean time to detect, mean time to respond, and then kind of reducing overall risk to an organization. So I'm going to focus on the automation and orchestration component, which really does encompass aspects of security incident response and threat intelligence components that I just outlined. So if I start with automation, this is really all about automating security operations related tasks. So the key question is, of course, which tasks should be automated? Now, to answer that, I would consider a couple of things. First of all, is this a routine task that you are kind of talking about? as in, does someone have to do this on a daily basis, perhaps every other day? Basically, is it something frequent? And secondly, is it time consuming? Because perhaps that time that's taken to manually execute that task could be reallocated for some more important and actually interesting tasks as well. So think about the tedious nature as well. So if the answer to both those questions is yes, then it is absolutely a potential candidate for automation. And really the key benefit of automation is reducing mean time to respond. So basically the time it takes to either contain or and remediate a threat, which could be something like blocking an IP address, applying a patch, or isolating a machine. And if a task becomes automated, then the analysts can be freed up for other tasks that they excel at. So tasks that require human intuition and skill, such as threat hunting, and those just cannot be codified whatsoever. Okay. So moving on to orchestration. Orchestration is really all about considering the wider technology ecosystem now. So the process of integrating these disparate tool sets to enable automation. So we create what are called like defined workflows or playbooks that are executed across this connected infrastructure. I guess consider what a typical incident workflow may look like. There are obviously going to be many steps involved and potential time savings at each stage could be made. So the flow may look something like this. It could be an alert is generated. Secondly, the analyst picks that up alert and they have to log an incident, right? That actually could be in a completely separate incident ticketing system. They may then have to query a SIEM solution to get other log data that can actually help them with their case. They will have to extract indicators from the data set and potentially perform manual lookups against intelligence sources. They will have to update that ticket with context that they've discovered so that any analyst that kind of rolls onto their shift can seamlessly pick up the case for them. They may have to take action, for example, in the form of an AV scan. They may have to escalate events to level 2, level 3 analysts, run communications to incident management, re-update the ticket. Of course, there's probably more steps than that, but I think you get the idea that there are many, 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 many steps, and some of those are absolutely key candidates for automation. Because if you think all those steps that I outlined then, if you manually conduct those, that is definitely in excess of 30 minutes, absolutely. Whereas if you start trying to automate and orchestrate, that could be boiled down to seconds, potentially minutes when automated. And actually, just going back to communication for a second, this is really something that's massively overlooked, because if you are suffering large-scale incidents that involve stakeholders across the business, so HR, legal, crisis teams, you can all collaborate and share information in kind of like war room-like capabilities within SOAR platforms, which really just streamlines that end-to-end process management. And lastly, I just want to finish this section on a question that pops up a lot and I'm asked a lot, which is, what is the difference between SOAR and SIEM? Okay, now very, very simply, SIEM boils down to log aggregation and correlation and I guess deriving alerts from that data set. SOAR extends those use cases, right? So you're not just acting as a data collection platform, but now enabling that bi-directional action in the form of playbooks and bringing that end-to-end investigation into a single place. Ollie, do you want to take the next slide?
Sure, just remember to come off mute there. So yeah, thanks, Paul. I think there's clearly as I mentioned at the start, there's clearly a number of challenges that we still face with SOAR as a solution. And I won't go into all of these in huge amounts of detail on this. And I should say this is not exhaustive, right? There's clearly these are just some of the more common themes that we've experienced ourselves. The whole sort of premise of DevSecOps and ultimately developers that also know security very, very well, that are security practitioners, are seemingly a highly valuable yet still pretty scarce skill set to find. And in finding those people, they can be difficult to retain, difficult to keep engaged, with enough variety and enough challenge in their work. So it's an interesting one just to sort of think about. Obviously, it goes without saying, there's a significant time investment. Hopefully, what Paul just outlined on the previous section gives you an idea of just how much investment there is in terms of time. But I would just emphasize, this is, whilst there is a significant upfront investment in time, this is a continuous investment. This is something that, as changes occur, as technologies develop, as APIs change, there's continuous development needed back into the platform. As alluded to on one of my previous slides with SOAR, I guess you're kind of seeking out as much data as possible, and your infrastructure, your processes, your workflows, etc., need to be engineered in order to cope with this, and in order to cope with future demand. Orchestration brings different platforms together to function as a coherent whole, but given all of these technologies are changing all the time, it really is a challenge in its own right to keep everything working, and to implement changes in a consistent and methodical way so that you're not breaking the sort of the chain or the process flows. And lastly, people talk about integration, and whilst integration as a concept can be relatively simple and can mean relatively simplistic things, what's usually needed is actually quite complicated, or at least will, going back to my first or second point, will take quite a significant investment in terms of time in order to do it properly and to do it well. And in many cases, these integrations that need to be built are not one-way integrations. It's not a case of simply enriching against data source. In many cases, it needs to be bi-directional. And there's an inherent challenge there around keeping platforms in sync or mirrored. But yeah, I think that's some of the key points. But as I say, it's not exhaustive by any stretch. Paul, I'll hand back over to you to take us through the next slide.
Thanks, Ali. All right, so the question is now, where do we start this journey? And I think the operative word here is of course journey, right? So we have to consider this an evolving process that is executed over time in these well-defined stages that produce outcomes to increase our maturity. You can see on the left-hand side there of the screen, the first thing that we recommend and actually did automate first of all at PwC was case management. Now, there's a few reasons for this, but the main driver is really all about having that, I guess, operational management, that rigor, that consistent process in place to underpin a case. Because if you can automate the ticket creation, assign that ticket to an analyst, potentially set priority in that case, assign attributes, tags, this is really a fundamentally great start to enable an analyst to focus on the event in hand. And a SOAR platform actually as well is very, very good at building up a history of cases. So it could be, tell me about all the places this alert has fired somewhere else, or tell me all about the places where kind of this user has triggered an event before. You're getting immediate insight into past cases that will aid your current case. And that actually brings a level of intelligence in itself, okay? The second step on that journey is enrichment. So if we just have a think about for a second what Ollie was describing at the beginning, so those challenges and pain points, the purpose of this stage is to address a few of those things like lack of context, lack of intelligence, the frustration of an analyst having to take those indicators and manually enriching them against intelligence sources. You can get really creative in those workflows as well that you start defining here. So think about, I don't know, an MD5 hash, for example. You could take into consideration things like, should that hash actually be rescanned, or should we look in our kind of database of past results that we may have enriched in the past? So the logic could be really something simple like, if the last scan date is greater than 30 days, then do another lookup. But then you can start transforming the output that you receive. So you could drop redundant fields, you could rename fields to match your common schema, you could create additional fields. And again, this is going to really help the journey for the analyst itself. And I think another really key one here is environmental awareness. Knowing your assets, I think that is the ultimate foundation to understanding risk and impact. So think about an incident, an event that's happened on a machine. I want to know exactly what the machine is. Is it a web server? Is it running an out of support operating system? Is it a truly internet facing web server? Is it considered my highly critical assets? That is a great picture that can help you drive that case through and actually put some urgency around it. The third thing as we kind of move up that maturity curve now is grouping and scoring. So grouping is all about linking alerts together to form an event. Okay, so not seeing things in isolation right now. We are trying to present the analyst with a near complete picture of exactly what is happening on that endpoint to tie alerts together across the attack chain. Because during an attack scenario, a threat actor is going to trigger alerts against multiple tactics and techniques. If you think about the attack framework, right? So you've got everything from things like initial access through to lateral movement, to privileged escalation, right the way through to data exfiltration. We want to tie all that together, because if you have good detection engineering, there are far too many tripwires in the form of kind of rule sets for an attacker to evade and for them to act on their objectives silently. And again, the logic around this, you can get fairly creative, but something quite simple to get going would be something like, right, let's take all grouped alerts that are fired on the same machine and in a single day, and that share the same process IDs, or that a series of alerts have happened within, for example, a 5-minute window, because you'll start to, produce those events across an attack chain then. And then you can do things like, right, well, if it crosses a certain threshold, we can then start escalating that event to, level 2, level 3, or something, similar to that. And then the last kind of stage that we've outlined here is containment and remediation. So this is now all about intelligence-driven action. So building the confidence from those previous stages, so the enrichments and the grouping and scoring stages, to reliably be able to contain and remediate. But one thing that we often do in this stage, you don't just want to go straight to blocking, is we'll often put things in what we call reporting mode, which is essentially a period of observation before moving to that blocking mode. So you're building up a picture of what would have been blocked. And more often than not, you'll definitely surface some false positives in there that can be tuned out. That might be over a series of weeks, and then you'll gain real confidence that you can start move to blocking. So think of that as almost like a baselining exercise. And just to finally wrap up, Ollie, if you just flip to the next slide. We wanted to bring this to life with a real world example. So this is an example of rapid detection and containment using, I guess, a combination of detection engineering and orchestration and automation. So before I just go through this timeline, just a bit of context. So this was a large retail client. They'd been persistently targeted over, well, actually every couple of weeks for a period of a few months by the attack group TA505, using, mass phishing emailing campaigns. So they target thousands of their staff to try and entice them to click on a hyperlink, which ultimately would download an Office document with a malicious macro embedded in it. Now, we knew by working with our threat intelligence team that if that was successful, the actor would ultimately deploy some ransomware. They'd be a few stages in between, kind of privilege escalation, lateral movement, working their way to the AD, domain controllers, that type of thing. But interestingly, in each of the previous cases, the malicious documents had been stopped by various prevention tools on this client's network. Now, in the background, we were still collecting intelligence on this group, defining some really good detection engineering. But the attacker obviously got wise to the fact that their campaign was not getting executed successfully. So they were trying to kind of modify their tactics. Eventually, they developed something that did bypass the very security controls on this particular client's network. But due to good detection engineering, some of the indicators that we actually had built detection content for in the previous campaigns that had failed triggered on their latest campaign, even though the actual malicious software was not getting blocked, which alerted our team. So the timeline here is basically, the key point is essentially from the point of triage, we had eyes on glass within 4 minutes. And then after another 3 minutes to contain, that was actually only possible because our orchestration and automation platform was handling 85 other low confidence events in the background, which essentially meant that our analysts were able to focus on the high priority events that the orchestration enrichment tool had presented to them and just not get bogged down in the weeds of all the low confidence events. So the orchestration automation was kind of monitoring all these low confidence events. And then should they have kind of moved up maybe to like a medium or high confidence event, they would have kind of triggered an analyst response in which this was the case. So I guess the summary here is that a combination of good detection engineering and being able to automate and orchestrate some tasks means that detection and response times really can be measured in minutes when done correctly. And the reality here is that if we hadn't been able to do that, then no doubt the attacker would have eventually executed their ransomware, and it would have been a completely different story. Ollie, do you want to wrap up for us?
Yeah, well, I was going to say I think that's the end of the initial bit and the key things that we wanted to deliver. So obviously very keen to take any questions that you've got. I know I think Winfried has already posted a question in the chat. I'll quickly just flash up the sort of mandatory disclaimer on screen before I stop presenting. But Paul, do you want to pick up Winfried's question around, which was just read it back to you. So
I don't think I've seen it. Yeah.
Okay. So how do you get the asset role into a SOAR solution? Is this inside knowledge or can it be automatic?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. So there are a couple of ways I guess you can do it. I guess the more kind of sophisticated way, if you like, would be dependent on like a CMDB solution. So having a good asset inventory. That might be to do with an asset discovery tool that is continuously feeding, granular asset attributes into a CMDB, which you can then kind of real time take extracts from through automation. But if you don't have a good CMDB, there are often capabilities within kind of endpoint agents as well that can actually extract some attributes for you. So you could say, all right, we'll get the operating system and the role of this machine. It may give you an indication of, it's, I don't know, server 2016, and the role is domain controller. So I pretty much know that is a critical asset. I guess that would be a still a good way of doing it, but the real answer is you need a good asset discovery solution connected to a CMDB that you can kind of take extracts from.
Thank you.
And do feel free to just sort of come off mute if you want to ask any questions directly, or if it's just sharing your own perspectives on your experience with SOAR, or the journey with automation.